They say money changes people. But I learned long ago, silence changes them faster. For 35 years I built a life that nobody, not even my son, really knew about. And if you think that's strange, wait until you hear what one dinner taught me about family, pride, and the price of being underestimated. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 68 years old, retired. Or at least that's what people think. What they don't know is that behind the worn carpet of my Indiana home, behind the old sedan in the driveway that rattles every winter morning, there's a story worth a fortune. I wasn't born rich. Far from it. I grew up in a time when a woman's best chance was to marry right. I didn't. I married a dreamer who disappeared before our son's 2nd birthday. After that, life stopped asking what I wanted. It started demanding what I was made of. I took the first job I could find, mail clerk at a shipping company outside Chicago. Minimum wage, 12-hour shifts, blisters for jewelry. But I had Michael, my little boy with hair the color of cornsilk and eyes too kind for a world like ours. Every night, after he fell asleep, I'd open a community college textbook and read by a dying lamp. Economics, accounting, logistics. Words I barely understood at first, but I knew they were tickets out of survival. Years turned into decades. I climbed the ladder rung by rung. Secretary, coordinator, supervisor, manager. Each promotion came with a smaller circle of people I could trust. Each raise went straight into savings, not shoes. My coworkers bought new cars. I bought stock. They mocked my thriftiness. I let them. Because quiet money doesn't need applause, it needs patience. When Michael left for college, I didn't tell him that the tuition check came from me, not scholarships. He thought I just handled paperwork at some company downtown. I let him believe it. I wanted him to learn work, not inheritance, effort, not entitlement. By the time I hit 60, I was vice president of operations at North Star Freight, a title that looked fancier on paper than it felt in the bones. My salary, $35,000 a month before bonuses. Enough to live 10 different lives. But I still came home to the same modest house, the same creaky kitchen table, the same chipped coffee mug that had seen every one of my late-night plans. I never flaunted a thing. Not because I feared envy, because I feared what money could do to love. You start buying affection, and suddenly it stops being affection at all. So I stayed quiet. Michael grew up thinking his mother lived paycheck to paycheck. He sent me Christmas sweaters and gas money, proud to return a little of what he thought I'd given. I never corrected him. Maybe that was my mistake. The year was 2012 when the story truly began. Summer slipping into fall, the air smelling like rain on warm pavement. Michael had moved to Cincinnati, married a woman named Laura, and built the kind of life that photographs well. She was polite, always polished, and came from a family that measured respect in square footage. I liked her, or maybe I wanted to. That Thursday afternoon, the phone rang while I was watering my porch ferns. I almost let it go to voicemail, but habit is a powerful thing. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice lighter than usual, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I smiled automatically. Well, look who remembered the old lady. He laughed, a little forced. "Come on, Mom. You know I call." "Sure. Usually when something's up." Silence. Then a sigh. I knew that sigh. It meant a favor was coming. "Actually," he began, Laura's parents are flying in next week. They'd love to meet you. We're planning dinner Saturday night. You'll come, right? There was something careful in his tone, like he was testing the air before stepping into it. Of course I'll come, I said. Where? He hesitated. It's at the Belridge Grill downtown. It's kind of nice. Kind of nice. That restaurant's wine list costs more than my entire grocery bill. Sounds lovely, I replied. Great, he said too quickly. And, don't worry about anything. We'll cover dinner. Cover dinner? My son had never said that to me before. It wasn't kindness. It was nervousness. I felt it, sharp as a paper cut. Michael, I asked softly, do they know what I do? He cleared his throat. I told them you worked in administration. You know, small office stuff. Small office stuff. I stared at the fern dripping in my hands, the water tracing down like tears that wouldn't fall. He wasn't lying out of malice. He was protecting an image. Protecting himself from the embarrassment of a mother who didn't fit their glossy expectations. I could have corrected him right there. I could have told him that for 20 years, people twice his father's age took orders from me. That I'd sat in boardrooms worth more than his in-laws' entire home. That I'd signed contracts that moved millions of dollars of cargo across continents. But I didn't. I simply said, "All right, honey. I'll be there." And when I hung up, the quiet in my living room was deafening. That night I sat at my desk, the one I'd bought second-hand when I first got promoted. Stacks of papers lined its surface. Pension reports, stock statements, property deeds, all proof of the life I'd built and chosen to hide. My reflection in the dark window looked back at me, weary but undefeated. "I guess we're going to dinner," I whispered. Here's where the story shifts from ordinary to something else. Because that moment, alone in the yellow glow of a table lamp, I decided to test more than manners. I wanted to see what happened when the truth wore rags. When wealth hid behind wrinkles and humility. Would they treat me as kindly poor as they did the powerful rich? I had a feeling I already knew the answer. The next few days passed in slow motion. At the grocery store, I caught myself glancing at other people's carts, the woman counting coupons, the man buying instant noodles, and I realized something. I'd spent my whole life earning more so I could need less. Maybe that was the real success. Friday night came with thunder. The storm rattled the windows, but I barely noticed. I was too busy rehearsing. Not what to say, what not to say. If they assumed I was broke, I'd let them. If they pitied me, I'd smile. I wanted to hear the things people only say when they think you have nothing to offer. And just when I started to wonder if I was being cruel, another thought cut through. Maybe the cruelest thing is never letting people reveal who they really are. Saturday morning smelled of coffee and regret. I opened my closet, full of suits and dresses that could stand beside any CEO's wardrobe, and pushed them aside until I found what I needed. An old beige cardigan, faded slacks, shoes with scuffed toes. My reflection looked tired, smaller somehow. Perfect. I tied my hair in a loose bun, no makeup, no jewelry. From the drawer I pulled an old canvas purse, frayed at the edges, and slipped my wallet inside, a plain leather one that could have been anyone's. The only thing valuable in it was a photograph. Me and Michael, taken when he was 10, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. As I left the house, the morning sun was climbing through grey clouds. I didn't take my car. I walked to the bus stop. The driver greeted me with a nod. I paid in quarters, felt their cool weight in my palm. The ride was long enough to think and short enough to doubt everything I was doing. What if I embarrassed Michael? What if Laura's parents were kind after all? What if the whole plan backfired, and I ended up being the one who looked small? But then I remembered every night I'd come home with grease under my nails and hope under my ribs. I remembered the sting of being overlooked in meetings because my hair was graying. I remembered surviving things they'd never understand. And I smiled. No, I wasn't small. I was simply quiet. There's a difference. The bus hissed to a stop near downtown. I stepped off into the hum of traffic, the smell of exhaust, and the sound of wealth. Heels on marble, laughter behind glass doors. People rushed past in polished shoes, carrying bags worth more than rent. No one looked twice at me, and for the first time in years, that anonymity felt liberating. I found a cafe across the street from the Belridge Grill. Ordered plain coffee. Black. Cheap. From my seat by the window, I watched the restaurant. Valets running, waiters gliding, couples arriving in cars that shone like mirrors. Inside, I imagined chandeliers glittering like judgment. Big night ahead, the barista joked when she brought my cup. Something like that, I replied. She smiled, young and oblivious. Whatever it is, good luck. I nodded, thinking, luck's got nothing to do with it. As I stirred the coffee, I thought about Michael as a boy, how he used to bring me dandelions and call them gold flowers. He once told me, "Someday, Mom, I'm going to make you proud." And he did. Even now, despite everything, I loved him fiercely. That's why I had to go through with this. Because sometimes love means teaching a lesson no one else can. At 5:45, my watch ticked louder than usual. Dinner was at 6. I finished my coffee, straightened my cardigan, and stepped into the drizzle that had started to fall. The walk across the street felt like walking into another world. Belridge Grill was the kind of place where napkins have their own waiters. A doorman in a crisp suit opened the door before I could touch it. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, scanning me politely but without warmth. "Good evening," I replied. His eyes flicked to my shoes. Habit, not cruelty. Still, it told me everything. Inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and confidence. Soft jazz, dim lights, laughter in controlled doses. I found the hostess stand, and the young woman behind it smiled with professional precision. "Reservation for Carter," I said. Her gaze traveled from my cardigan to my purse. "One moment, please." She checked the screen, nodded, and motioned toward the back. "Your party is already seated." As I followed her through the maze of white-clothed tables, I saw reflections of myself in every polished surface. An elderly woman dressed too simply for the room. Some diners glanced up, then back down, quick enough to sting. Every step reminded me why I'd chosen this path. And then I saw them. Michael stood when he spotted me, his smile tight, almost pained. Laura rose beside him, graceful but stiff. Across from them sat a couple who could have stepped out of a magazine. Diane and Charles Turner. She wore pearls like they were birthrights. He, a watch thick as a cuff. Even from a distance, I could feel their appraisal begin. "Mom, you made it," Michael said, forcing brightness into his tone. "Of course," I smiled, letting my voice tremble just enough. "Wouldn't miss meeting the family." Laura leaned in for a quick cheek kiss. Cold, perfunctory. "So nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Carter." I corrected her gently. "Just Helen." She nodded, already turning to readjust her napkin. Charles stood halfway, offered a hand that was firm but brief. "Pleasure," he said, as if delivering a verdict. Diane's handshake was cooler still, her smile polished to perfection. "Michael talks about you all the time," she said. "Such a devoted mother." The way she lingered on devoted made it sound like dependent. I took my seat, folding the napkin on my lap. "Lovely place," I murmured. "Oh yes," Diane replied. "We come here whenever we're in town." The chef trained in Paris. Her eyes flicked toward my cardigan. "I hope it's not too formal." "Not at all," I said, smiling. "I've eaten before." Her lips twitched, uncertain whether I was joking. Menus arrived. French names everywhere. I pretended to squint. "Oh my, I can't even pronounce half of this." Charles chuckled, the patronizing kind. "Don't worry, Helen. We'll help you pick something simple." Simple. The word dropped like a stone. Michael shifted in his seat, pretending to study his menu. "Well," I said, keeping my voice meek, "maybe just the soup and salad. I'm not very hungry." Diane smiled sweetly. "That's smart. These portions can be overwhelming." Overwhelming. Indeed. The waiter poured wine, deep red, expensive enough to taste arrogance. I declined. "Just water, thank you." Diane raised her glass. "To family," she said. Charles added, "and to new beginnings." Their smiles glistened. Mine held steady. As conversation bloomed around the table, I spoke little, observed much. They talked of cruises, golf memberships, Laura's foundation work, all lined with self-congratulation. Every now and then Diane turned to me with a question disguised as politeness. "So, Helen, do you keep busy these days?" "Oh, I said. A little of this, a little of that." "Must be nice to relax after working in an office, was it?" "Yes," I nodded. "Many years of paperwork can tire a woman." She laughed lightly. "I can imagine." "Well, good for you." I looked at my son. He avoided my eyes, sipping wine like it could hide him. I wanted to reach across the table, touch his hand, tell him I understood. But this wasn't the time for comfort. This was the time for clarity. The waiter arrived with our meals, steam rising, silver flashing. As he placed the bowls, Diane whispered something to Charles. He smiled thinly. I didn't need to hear it. Tone speaks louder than words. I took a slow sip of water, then another, letting the silence stretch just enough for them to feel it. If life were poker, this was the moment before the cards turned. Because they thought they knew who I was, a poor widow clinging to decency. But what they didn't know was that I held every ace in the deck. And before the night was over, they'd see them all. The waiter placed our plates down like a magician revealing secrets. Smooth, deliberate, practiced. The scent of roasted garlic and butter hung in the air, almost enough to mask the tension building beneath our tablecloth. Diane Turner had that kind of smile that looked perfect until you realized it was only painted on. So Helen, she began, slicing her steak into delicate cubes. Michael tells us you've lived in the same house all these years. How charming. I don't know how you do it. I'd go crazy without a change of scenery. I smiled faintly. It's home. The kind that holds your memories whether you like it or not. Charles chuckled. I suppose you get attached to things when you don't move around much. His wife's hand brushed his arm, a signal to soften. He didn't. I simply nodded. Yes. Some things are worth keeping. Laura reached for her glass, trying to redirect. Mom, Dad just redid their vacation home in Naples. You'd love it. Maybe we can all go sometime. Laura reached for her glass, trying to redirect. Mom, Dad just redid their vacation home in Naples. You'd love it. Maybe we can all go sometime. Diane brightened. Oh yes. The guest house is perfect for company. You'd have your own little space, Helen. Maybe even a part-time job down there. Something to keep busy. I hear the boutiques are always hiring. The comment hit soft but landed sharp. Michael's fork froze mid-air. Mom doesn't need. It's all right, I interrupted gently. I'm sure it's lovely in Naples. The words tasted bitter, but I smiled as if they weren't. Charles leaned back, surveying me. You know, Diane and I just believe in keeping busy after retirement. Purpose, you know? I tell her all the time. We were lucky to plan ahead. Saved. Invested. It's what separates people who coast from people who climb. His voice carried the smug weight of someone who'd never had to climb with bare hands. I stirred my soup slowly. I suppose that's true, I said. But sometimes climbing makes you forget to look back. He tilted his head. Meaning, I said softly. Not everyone who's quiet is standing still. He blinked, clearly not sure if he'd been insulted or praised. Laura laughed lightly, cutting through the moment. Mom's always full of little sayings like that. I think it's from all her church volunteering. Is that so? Diane asked. I met her eyes. Something like that. The next hour dripped by one comment at a time, each polite, each layered with something heavier. They spoke of market fluctuations, country clubs, renovation projects, and vacation homes as if reciting proof of their worth. When they asked me questions, they weren't looking for answers. They were looking for confirmation. And I gave them what they wanted. I let them believe I was small. So tell me, Diane said at one point, cutting into her dessert. How does it feel, being on your own all these years? Must be lonely sometimes. Sometimes, I said. But loneliness can be peaceful when you make peace with it. Her expression faltered. Well, that's one way to look at it. Charles dabbed his mouth with his napkin, looking pleased. You seem like a proud woman, Helen. That's good. Pride helps people get through the tough years. I smiled. It does. So does hard work. Of course, he added, as if it were an afterthought. If you ever needed help, Michael knows we're here. We take care of family. Diane nodded, leaning forward as though about to share something benevolent. Actually, Charles and I were talking before dinner. We thought maybe we could help you out a bit. You know, take some pressure off. You shouldn't have to worry about things at your age. Michael's face drained of color. Mom doesn't. But Diane was already continuing, her voice syrupy. We could send you a little something every month. Not much, just enough for groceries or gas. A token, really. It took me a moment to speak. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't sure which stung worse, their assumption or my son's silence. Michael didn't protest. He didn't defend me. He stared at his plate, trapped in the shame of the image he'd built. I finally said, "That's very kind of you." Diane smiled, mistaking my composure for gratitude. "Oh, nonsense. Family helps family. It's the least we can do." Her tone was soft, but the pity in it felt like a knife. Charles added with a laugh, "Just promise you won't refuse it out of pride. You know how stubborn older folks can be." I looked at him evenly. "I'll keep that in mind." Silence fell, thick, heavy, and polite. The kind that buzzes louder than words. I glanced at Michael. He looked like a child again, shoulders slumped, guilt written across his face. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was all right, that I understood. But understanding is not the same as forgiveness. The waiter appeared with fresh water, breaking the tension like a metronome resetting time. "Anything else I can get you?" "No," I said softly. "I think we've had enough." He left, and the silence returned, stretching wider. Diane tried to fill it with brightness. "Well, it's been such a lovely evening. We must do this again soon." Laura nodded too eagerly. "Definitely." Charles smiled like a man certain he'd done a good deed. "Next time, Helen, we'll take you to the club. You'll love it there. Great people, very welcoming." I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. "I'm sure they are." The check arrived, and Charles waved for it before anyone could move. "Please, allow me," he said. "Wouldn't be right otherwise." Diane smiled proudly at him, her hand resting on his sleeve. I watched the waiter hand over the leather folder, the exchange quiet but symbolic. Money, for some people, is just another way to dominate conversation. Charles signed with a flourish. "All taken care of," he said. "No worries tonight." "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm. "Truly generous." Diane's eyes gleamed. "Oh, it's nothing, really. We're just glad you could join us." Glad. That word again. Glad, as if my presence was a favor returned. I stood, slow and steady, my hands resting on the table for balance. "Excuse me," I said, my voice still soft, still measured. "Before we leave, may I say something?" The table went still. Charles leaned back, smiling politely. "Of course." I looked around at their faces. My son's nervous, Laura's uncertain, Diane's composed, Charles's smug. And I felt something rise in me, not anger, but clarity. "Thank you," I said again. "You've all been so kind. Truly. It's rare to meet people so concerned about others' comfort. You've offered generosity, advice, and even a little help for my old age." Diane blushed slightly, unsure whether I was teasing or grateful. "But," I continued, "I think it's only fair that before you decide how much help I need, you know a little more about who I am." The words settled over them like dust. Charles tilted his head, half smiling. "Oh, And who are you, Helen? I met his gaze, unwavering. Someone who's been underestimated her entire life. And in that moment, I could feel the balance shift. So slight they didn't notice, but enough to change everything that would follow. Charles's smirk stayed frozen for a second too long. The room felt smaller, quieter, like even the chandeliers had leaned in to listen. I folded my hands in front of me, calm as Sunday morning. You see, I said, for the last 20 years before I retired, I ran operations at North Star Freight. Vice President. Oversaw international contracts worth millions. Maybe you've heard of us. We ship everything from pharmaceuticals to construction steel. Diane's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Laura blinked, her fork still in midair. Michael stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. And Charles just frowned, searching for a joke that wasn't there. You worked there? He asked. I didn't work there, I said softly. I helped build it. It was the kind of silence that doesn't breathe. You could hear the clock behind the bar tick twice before anyone dared move. Diane was the first to recover. Well, she began, voice trembling with artificial cheer. That's quite an accomplishment. I had no idea. No, I said, smiling faintly. You didn't. Michael's voice broke in a whisper. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Because, sweetheart, I said, meeting his eyes, I wanted you to grow up proud of what you earned, not of what I owned. He swallowed hard, guilt flooding every line of his face. I wanted to reach out and tell him it was okay, but not yet. The truth still needed air. Charles cleared his throat. So, you must have done pretty well for yourself. Well enough, I replied. I own my home outright. Several, actually. Stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. I'm not bragging, just clarifying that I don't need help paying for groceries. Diane's cheeks went pink. She looked at her plate like it might save her. I didn't mean to offend you, she murmured. You didn't offend me, I said gently. You just revealed something about yourself. She glanced up. What do you mean? That kindness without respect isn't kindness at all. No one spoke. The waiter appeared then, hovering nervously. Can I get anyone dessert? No, I said, my tone soft but final. Just the check, please. He nodded and disappeared. I turned back to the table, folding my napkin carefully. You know, Diane, when you offered to send me a little money each month, I almost thanked you. Almost. But then I remembered, pity and generosity don't come from the same place. Laura's eyes glistened. Helen, please. They didn't mean it that way. Oh, they did, I said calmly. And that's all right. Sometimes people can't see past their own reflection. Charles straightened. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We were trying to be nice. I know, I said. And I was trying to be quiet. The waiter returned with the check, setting it beside Charles. He reached for it, but I was faster. Let me, I said. Oh no, please. It's only fair, I interrupted. You paid last time you pitied someone, didn't you? He froze, his hand retreating slowly. I took out a black credit card and laid it on top of the folder. The metal gleamed under the candlelight. The waiter's eyebrows twitched, the kind of reaction only someone who recognized it would have. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly, taking it away. Diane stared at the card, her lips parting. "Is that?" "Yes," I said. "It is." Charles let out a small, awkward laugh. "Well, that's impressive. Guess we underestimated you." "Don't worry," I said. "You're not the first." The waiter returned, receipt in hand, his demeanor transformed, respectful, deferential. I signed and added a generous tip. "You've been wonderful," I told him. He smiled. "Thank you, ma'am." When he left, I looked at Diane, then at Charles. "You know," I said softly, "I've spent my whole life watching people measure worth in things they can lose. But dignity's the only thing that keeps its value no matter what room you're in." Diane's voice wavered. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said. "But you did. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes pain is the only way to teach humility." I pushed back my chair. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll head home." Michael stood quickly. "Mom, let me drive you." "No," I said. "You stay. You've still got a few things to think about." His face fell. "Mom, please." I touched his shoulder gently. "It's all right, honey. You didn't fail me. You just forgot who I was for a little while." The others sat in silence, unable to look up. I turned toward the door, the murmur of other tables rising and falling like background music to an old truth. Respect is never given freely. It's earned, and sometimes demanded. Outside, the night had started to rain. I walked down the steps slowly, the chill brushing against my face like forgiveness. A taxi pulled up beside the curb, its headlights glowing through the drizzle. I opened the door, slid inside, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Home," I said. He nodded, pulling away. The city lights blurred against the wet glass, streaks of gold and red sliding by like fading memories. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. Because that night, for the first time in years, I'd told the truth. And it felt good to finally stop pretending I was less than what I was. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It drummed against the kitchen window like 1,000 quiet reminders that some storms don't end overnight, they just change tempo. I sat at my old wooden table, the one that still bore the scratches from Michael's childhood homework sessions. The coffee in my mug had gone cold twice. I wasn't drinking it anymore. I was just holding it, something to fill the space between thoughts. My phone sat face down beside me. I'd turned the ringer off the night before. Still, I could feel the apology waiting inside it, buzzing to be heard. The night replayed in flashes, the pitying smiles, the clink of silverware, Diane's offer of a little help. And then the silence after I'd told them who I really was. Funny thing about truth. When you drop it on a table full of pride, it sounds louder than thunder. At 8:30, there was a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant, familiar. I didn't need to look. I knew that rhythm by heart. When I opened it, Michael stood there, damp from the rain, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. He wasn't the confident man in tailored suits I'd seen at dinner. He looked more like the boy who used to hide behind my legs when strangers spoke too loud. "Morning, Mom," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied, stepping aside. "You're up early." He smiled faintly. Didn't sleep much. I figured. He walked in, dripping on the doormat, glancing around like the furniture might judge him too. You haven't changed a thing, he murmured. Same curtains, same old clock. Old things still work, I said, heading toward the kitchen. Coffee? He nodded. Please. I poured him a cup, and for a while we just listened to the rain fill the silence. He held the mug with both hands, the steam fogging his glasses. Mom, he said finally, voice cracking a little, I owe you an apology. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to give him space to mean it. He took a breath. I lied. To them. About you. About your life. I told them you worked part-time at a local office because, I don't know. I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable. I offered. He nodded, ashamed. Yeah. I thought they'd look down on you if they knew you weren't like them. I leaned against the counter. And did that make you feel safe? No, he said, eyes dropping to his cup. It made me feel small. The second you started talking last night, I realized how wrong I was. He looked up at me then, and in his eyes I saw a child again, not weak, just human. You shouldn't have had to prove yourself, he said. Not to them, not to me. I smiled softly. I wasn't proving anything. I was teaching. He laughed under his breath. Yeah, well, lesson learned. The rain grew heavier, tapping the roof like punctuation. I sat across from him. You know, Michael, I didn't hide my success because I wanted to keep secrets. I did it because people treat money like a mirror. They see themselves in it. And most of the time, they don't like what they see. He rubbed his eyes. I just wanted them to like you. Sweetheart, I said gently, if someone has to be lied to in order to like me, that's not affection, it's theater. And I stopped performing a long time ago. He nodded, his throat tightening. They're embarrassed, Mom. Diane called this morning. She cried. Said they didn't mean to sound condescending. Good, I said quietly. Maybe they'll think twice next time before deciding who deserves their respect. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You know, Dad used to say you were the toughest woman he ever met. Your father said a lot of things, I replied, a ghost of laughter escaping. But that one I'll take. The clock ticked softly between us, filling the quiet like an old song. Then he asked, Are you mad at me? I shook my head. No. Disappointed for a moment. Sure. But not mad. You're my son, Michael. You're allowed to forget once in a while. My job is to remind you. He laughed quietly. You did that. Well, I said, sipping my now lukewarm coffee, it's what mothers do best. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. I don't know how to make it up to you. You already are, I said, by showing up. The rain began to ease, thinning into a soft drizzle. He looked out the window, watching the drops chase each other down the glass. You know, he said, I told Laura I was coming here. She wanted to come too, but I thought maybe it'd be better if I came alone first. That was smart, I said. Sometimes people need time to process what they see when their picture of the world changes. He nodded. She's a good woman, Mom. Just raised in a different kind of home. I know, I said. I don't dislike her. I just dislike what comfort does to people when they stop questioning it. He smiled. You always know how to say things that sound like riddles. Life's full of them, I replied. The trick is not to solve them, just to understand the lesson they hide. He stood and came around the table, wrapping his arms around me. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. His embrace was heavier now, the hug of a grown man still holding on to his mother's forgiveness. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I know, I said softly. And I love you. Always. He pulled back, wiping at his eyes. You're something else, you know that? I've been called worse, I said with a small grin. He chuckled, then hesitated. They want to apologize in person. Diane and Charles. Dinner again. Their treat this time. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what's the occasion? They said they'd like to make things right. I pretended to think. Maybe. But only if they can handle sitting across from someone who doesn't need their approval. He laughed. Fair enough. We talked a little longer, about work, about Laura's parents, about life. When he finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight pushed through the clouds, spilling gold across the kitchen floor. It looked like forgiveness made visible. At the door, he turned to me. You know, last night I kept thinking you were angry. But this morning I get it. What's that? I asked. He smiled. You weren't angry, Mom. You were free. I watched him drive away, the tires hissing over the wet pavement, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Not because I'd proven anything, but because the truth had done what it always does when it's finally spoken aloud. It had set us both free. 2 weeks passed before I heard from them again. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the air feels warm but still carries the faint ache of summer's end. I was out in the yard, trimming the rose bushes, when I saw a familiar car pull up. A silver sedan. Michael's. But it wasn't just him this time. Laura stepped out first, and behind her, Diane and Charles. I stayed still for a moment, pruning shears in hand, watching them approach the gate like visitors to a churchyard, humbled, uncertain, rehearsing apologies in their heads. Michael waved. Nervous. Hey, Mom. Hey, I said, setting the shears aside. You all come to help me garden? That broke the tension just enough. Laura smiled shyly. Not unless you want us to kill your roses. Fair enough, I replied. Come on in. They followed me up the path. Diane's eyes flicked over the porch, its chipped paint, the rocking chair, the flower pots lined up unevenly. But this time, there was no condescension in her gaze. Just quiet curiosity. They followed me up the path. Diane's eyes flicked over the porch, its chipped paint, the rocking chair, the flower pots lined up unevenly. But this time, there was no condescension in her gaze. Just quiet curiosity. Inside, I poured lemonade instead of coffee. The air was light with the scent of lilacs from the vase on the table. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Diane cleared her throat. Helen, she began, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. We wanted to come by and apologize in person. For everything. I looked at her, really looked at her. Not the pearls or the posture, but the person underneath. All right, I said softly. Go on. She took a deep breath. That night at dinner, I thought I was being kind. I really did. But kindness that looks down isn't kindness at all. You were right. Charles shifted uncomfortably beside her. We both realized how we sounded. We're sorry. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, I nodded. Apology accepted. They seemed almost surprised by how easily it came. Thank you, Diane said. You had every right to be angry. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But anger's heavy. I've carried enough in my life. Charles rubbed the back of his neck. You really taught us something that night. Oh, I asked. And what's that? He hesitated. That humility doesn't come from losing. It comes from realizing how easily you could have. I liked that answer. It sounded learned, not borrowed. Laura reached across the table, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry too, Helen. I should have spoken up when they made those comments. I knew it wasn't right. I patted her hand. You're young. You'll learn when silence is the same as agreement. Michael exhaled, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. She's been talking about that dinner ever since, Mom. You really made an impression. I chuckled softly. That wasn't my goal, but life has its way of giving lessons when words don't work. Diane smiled nervously. I hope you'll let us make it up to you. Maybe dinner again? Our treat this time. No speeches, no assumptions. I thought for a moment, then nodded. All right. But this time, let's make it a potluck. Everyone brings something to the table. Literally. That earned a laugh around the room. A small one but honest. The air felt lighter then, like the house had finally exhaled. We talked for another hour. Nothing deep. Gardening, travel, grandkids, small things. But every word carried a different tone than before. There was respect in the pauses now. Understanding in the laughter. When they finally stood to leave, Diane lingered at the doorway. You know, she said, I was raised to believe money defined how far you'd come. But you've made me realize, it only shows how far you've yet to go. I smiled. That's the kind of wealth no one can take from you. She nodded, eyes soft. Thank you, Helen. For your patience. For your humility, I said. When the car disappeared down the street, I walked back to the porch, the afternoon sun warm against my skin. The roses I'd been trimming earlier leaned toward the light, imperfect but alive, just like people learning to grow again after being cut back. I sat in my chair, rocking slowly, and thought about the long road that had brought me here. How strange, that after all the years of climbing ladders, my greatest satisfaction came from something as simple as being seen clearly. I realized then that we spend so much of life trying to prove ourselves to people who aren't even looking. But when truth finally takes the stage, it doesn't need applause. It just needs silence long enough for the lesson to land. The phone rang once more that evening. It was Michael. Dinner went well, huh? He asked. Better than expected, I said. They brought humility for dessert. He laughed. You really are something, Mom. Maybe, I said. But remember, I didn't do it to embarrass them. I did it so you'd never let anyone decide your worth. I won't, he said quietly. Not again. After we hung up, I sat for a while, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air turned cool, crickets began their song, and the first stars blinked awake, unimpressed by the world below but steady all the same. And I thought to myself, money fades, looks fade, status fades, but dignity, Dignity stays bright long after the noise goes dark. That was the night I learned that sometimes the richest thing you can own is your silence.